On this Tuesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies, I am going to put over a decade of NBA trade machine experience to work, and I'm going to give you everything you need to know, the do's and don'ts of interacting with the trade machine this time of year when it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there. Once again, it is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. DeMichael Cole, my co-host, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, will be back with us soon. It's been a crazy week or so for both DeMichael and myself. So glad that you guys have been patient with us as we continue to try to get episodes out each and every day for you, our loyal listeners and viewers, our everydayers. If you're not an everydayer, make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google. It is all good. Make sure you're following us on X at DeMichael C for my wonderful co-host. Not with me today. I am with you the next 30 or so minutes. I am Joe Mullinax at Joe Mullinax on X. Feel free to follow me there. And this is a wonderful time of year to follow me. I'm biased. I think it's a wonderful time of year to follow me every day and every year. But every month, every week, every season, really. But I think it's a wonderful time of year because every once in a while, I like to dabble. If you're an everydayer, if you followed my career over the last decade or so, going back to my time at SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues, formerly SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues, may she rest in peace. She was a beautiful website. If you followed my career there, if you've checked out some of the things I do in other spots, you know I love the trade machine. I'm a trade machine guy, okay? I call myself the ArmChair GM. And every once in a while, I put out a pretty acceptable deal that has multiple fan bases mad, which usually means that's a fair transaction to project. But as life has been crazy the last week or two, I have not been able to fully sink my teeth into the transactional arena. And I know that others out there have given their shot. They're putting out a good shot. They're giving it a look. I'm going high voice. They're giving it a try. And I'm happy for them. I shouldn't be allowed to have all the fun. Go ArmChair GM it up. In fact, go into the comments. Let me know some trades that you like, and maybe I'll be able to approve or deny in my ArmChair GM wisdom. But I have noticed some malpractice when it comes to these trade machine ideas, like the idea of trying to go and bring in Malik Monk and John Collins for Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. You just made the team worse, my friend. Or others trying to acquire numerous draft picks in the lottery while holding on to Ja Morant. If you're going to triple down, quadruple, quintuple down on youth, you might as well start a rebuild, right? Might as well trade Ja while you're at it. And I am not advocating for that. Again, if you're an everydayer, you know that I want to see what Ja and Dez and Jaren do in this Tuomas Isolo system that is fully his now as the full-time head coach. And I also want to see what they do with some roster moves around those guys, actual veteran players, right? Not having to rely on rookies. No offense to Jalen Wells and Zach Edey, who had great seasons. But actual NBA veterans next to these guys, what can they accomplish? We haven't seen that yet, right? Right. So I do want to give some advice, impart some wisdom to my fellow ArmChair GMs out there. Do's and don'ts when it comes to the Memphis trade machine. And the first do that I will suggest, if you are going to partake in the dark arts that are hypothetical trades, the first thing that you have to acknowledge is that you will always value your own players more than literally everybody else, right? Exhibit A, if you're feeling froggy and you want to jump and you want to trade away Ja Morant, again, I would not do that, but maybe you're bored on this Tuesday and you hop on the trade machine and you see what you can get. You, dear listener, dear viewer, almost certainly value Ja more than the average NBA franchise does at this point. Ja Morant is an oft-injured mid-20s point guard who has flashes of brilliance, but also has flashes of immaturity that lead to him missing time on the court, not just because of injury, but because of suspension. Can you count on Ja Morant? In Memphis, we believe we can, of course. And I want to stress once more that I would not trade Ja at this stage of his career, but I would be lying if I said that is 100% because I believe in Ja. I do believe Ja to be a talent that you hold on to if you want to contend for a title. But is he the best player on a championship team? Probably not. And if I think that, then I promise you opposing NBA fan bases, and more importantly for this exercise, opposing NBA GMs feel that way. So is Ja for Giannis really going to swing it? Probably not. You probably need more than Ja to bring in a Giannis Antetokounmpo. Ja for Trae Young? Maybe you're closer. But does that really solve any problems for the Memphis Grizzlies? The offense maybe gets a little more efficient. The three-point shooting of Young, perhaps one of the few point guards in the league that's a better facilitator than Ja. But Trae is a worse defender than Morant is. Like, that's undisputed at this point. So how does that equate? How does that contribute? Are you making a trade for the sake of making a trade? Keep that perspective. Always understand that you will value your asset more than anybody else will. And also understand that Memphis should not be in the business of doing anything halfway. If you want to go the rebuild route, I do think there's a pathway there that would make sense. I wouldn't do it, but I do think that you can get to a place where you acquire numerous assets and you set yourself up over the next couple of seasons to have really high draft picks of your own and controlling future drafts down the road. Not quite what the Oklahoma City Thunder did, but similar, close. I think that's a possibility, but you don't want to trade away Ja in a rebuilding concept in your trade machine deal, or even a Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr., and then hold on to pieces and say, oh, well, the team actually got better. No, the team did not get better trading away Jaren Jackson Jr. for John Collins. That didn't occur. No, getting that 5th overall pick from the Jazz does not make it better. Are we trying to win a championship or not? Are you quintupling down on youth or not? Do keep the perspective of you're either in on a rebuild or you're not. You're either in on this core being able to contend or you're not. And if you are in on this core being able to contend, my last do is do include things of actual value to opposing teams. More than ever before, I think the NBA probably questions whether or not Memphis is going to be able to win again at the level that they have in the past with this core group. If I had to bet, I would imagine the NBA at large sees the Grizzlies as a bottom half of the Western Conference team more than a top half of the Western Conference. Now, maybe Memphis is at the top of that bottom. Maybe the Grizzlies are seen as the 7th or 8th best team out west going into next season. But again, that puts you in the play-in. Are you a title contender if you're one of those spots? Probably not. You are going to have to give up more than just John Conchar and filler to bring in an actual contributing veteran player. It's going to take a G.G. Jackson. Even after a down season, and it was a down year. But G.G. Jackson has value as a young talent. You send him to a team that's trying to rebuild, like Washington or Charlotte or Brooklyn, and you allow for him to develop and grow, or Utah, you could probably get a veteran player, not exactly sure who, but that could be part of a larger package, but you're going to have to give up something. Nobody's going to say, okay, John Conchar and 2 firsts for Herb Jones. Thanks. That's a great deal, Memphis Grizzlies. Yeah, it's great for Memphis. But what did the Pelicans get out of it? What does the opposing team get out of it? You have to keep that perspective. So, make a decision. Choose a path. Go all in with it. Make sure that you are prioritizing value and understanding that you are going to value your own assets, in this case, the assets of the Memphis Grizzlies, more than anybody else's. And if you want to have a realistic deal, you have to keep all of that in mind as you work through the hypothetical trade machine. So those are some of my do's. when it comes to being an armchair GM this time of year. Let me know on X at Joe Mullinax. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you agree with my dues or if you have any others, or again, if you want to run some trades by me. I'm all ears, all eyes on those types of things. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going the opposite end of the spectrum. Some Memphis trade machine don'ts. Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by CarGurus. Shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting, but between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel overwhelming. That's why I love CarGurus. They help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, CarGurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the United States. They verify dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data you need to make the right choice without second-guessing yourself. If you need a deal you can trust, CarGurus makes it easy to compare vehicles side by side with unbiased deal ratings. Plus, the in-depth vehicle details give you peace of mind before stepping onto any lot. It is no wonder that SimilarWeb estimated traffic data shows CarGurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site. Buy or sell your next car today with CarGurus at CarGurus.com. Go to CarGurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's CarGurus.com, CarGurus.com. So I gave you some dues of the trade machine. I have over a decade of experience with this. That's one of the positives of being bald, ladies and gentlemen. That's one of the positives of the gray in this beard. I have seen some stuff, and I can impart that wisdom onto you as you partake wherever your trade machine journey takes you. I gave you some do's, and I'm going to give you some don'ts. Don't numero uno. Don't realize and rely on acquiring a superstar for the sake of acquiring a superstar. For example, Zion Williamson could potentially be had. There's lots of signs that New Orleans is acting as if that's not the case, but the Pelicans are probably entering a period where anybody and everybody, except maybe Trey Murphy, is on the table. If Zion Williamson is available and you're willing to give up, say, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane for Zion and future assets, maybe a first-round pick, does that really make Memphis better? Who's going to shoot the basketball, right? That's one of the concerns of a Giannis trade. I talked about that recently. I believe it was last week on Locked On Grizzlies. Giannis for Jaren and Bane. Yeah, it'd be awesome to have arguably the best pick and roll in the NBA with Giannis and Ja. But you're going to have to make sure there's floor spacers next to those guys. Otherwise, they're just going to collapse on everything. And it's not going to be as impactful as it could be. And again, Jaren, not the most efficient shooter, but you have to respect his, I hate the phrase, but you have to respect his gravity. Desmond Bane is an excellent shooter, and you have to respect him too. So you can't just make a move for the sake of making a move. It has to be a roster fit. John Giannis, I would give it a shot, but you have to. What's next? Where's the other shoe dropping there? If you're going to move on from Ja, are you prioritizing a star like a Trae Young? Or do you say that Dez and Jaren are going to be your two stars, which would be a bold strategy, and you try to put starters around those guys? And if that's the case, you need a pass-first point guard, a facilitator, somebody that's going to be able to create off the dribble and off of cuts and all sorts of other ways, a multi-use facilitator. Because you're losing that in Morant if you make a move involving Ja. So don't make a swing for the sake of a swing. It has to make roster sense. I'm guilty of that one myself. Again, I still think Ja and Giannis is worth giving a go, but criticism of that is fair. You also don't want to move on from controllable contracts that have shown promise recently, if at all possible. Jalen Wells isn't untouchable, but he's close. He's close because you've got him for the next few years, and he is on a very team-friendly deal. And there are ways to make these roster moves where he slides into the 2 spot instead of the 3. And DeMichael Cole, my co-host, has talked about that in the past. How exciting would it be to have a big enough lineup? Maybe not Kevin Durant as your 3, but to have Jalen Wells as your 2 That is something that allows for me to be a little bit more okay with the idea of moving on from Desmond Bane. I don't love that. If you're an everydayer, you know I'm a Desmond Bane guy. But if that's the path that the Grizzlies choose, if you can get bigger on the perimeter with Wells and a scoring wing, it's exciting. That's something that could help the team in the long run. There's no denying that the undersized backcourt has hurt Memphis at times. So don't make a big trade for the sake of making a big trade. Don't move on from good team-controlled contracts. Gigi Jackson perhaps being the exception to that rule. And another don't, and this is extremely important to understand. Don't ever, with this Memphis Grizzlies team, unless you are approaching it from the sake of a rebuild, give them a lottery pick in this draft. Here's why. Unless it's Cooper Flag, right? The Dallas Mavericks, if they're trading that first overall pick, it's going to be for somebody like, not even Kevin Durant, maybe Giannis, right? That would be the only way they would make that kind of a deal, I think. Because Cooper Flag checks the Nico Harrison box, assuming Nico Harrison stays the GM in Dallas, of defense. Flag is a good offensive player too, but he is potentially if not potentially, probably the best defensive prospect in the 2025 NBA draft. And he can score the ball, and he can create offense for himself and others off the dribble. So he makes a lot of sense for the Mavericks. It would take a lot to move on from that pick. But Utah giving the number 5 overall pick to Memphis, I don't see it. What's the end game for the Grizzlies? How does that help them win a championship if that is their stated goal? How does interacting with Washington or New Orleans or Brooklyn for those later lottery selections, how does that help the process? I'm not entirely sure that it does. How do you put yourself in a position, if you are the Grizzlies, to hang tough in a Western Conference that's only going to get more difficult this offseason? How do you do that if you prioritize making another high lottery selection? That should not be your target unless you are going the full rebuild route. And if you are, in terms of a thought exercise, I think that's fascinating. What do you get for John Morant? You reach out to the Orlando Magic. What are they willing to give up? They need a point guard pretty badly. What do you do with the Brooklyn Nets? Brooklyn could probably use a guy like a John Morant. There are interesting possibilities there if you want to have those conversations. I like the thought exercise of the trade machine. Where do you see value? Where do opposing teams see the value in the players and assets and draft picks and capital that your franchise that you support have accumulated? That's why I like the trade machine more than anything else. Not because I think the trades are actually going to happen. It's a conversation starter. So while I wouldn't trade Ja Morant, I'm interested in what you think Ja is worth on the trade market. Same thing with Dez, same thing with Jaren. And I do think that Desmond Bane is the most likely player to be moved on from. But I am not interested in seeing a Jaren Jackson Jr. for the number 5 overall pick from Utah in money filler. In what way does that make the Memphis Grizzlies better in the here and now? If you're trying to get Memphis competitive in this Western Conference, it has to be veteran players that are coming back. You want to trade Desmond Bane for a couple of starters, all-star level at times, player in Bane for a couple of role players? Maybe that makes the Grizzlies better. There's a world where that's true. Same thing if you wanted to move on from Jaren Jackson Jr. If you don't want to pay him, you don't think he's worth it. I think he is, but maybe you don't. Find a trade that brings back a couple of starters that can accentuate what Ja and Dez do well. More and more, you hear people make the argument with the new collective bargaining agreement about how you have 2 big contracts and you fill in around those guys. If that's the case, one of these Grizzlies is going to have to be moved on from. So it's not disputing that angle in any way, shape, or form. It's understanding that in Memphis, a true blue rebuild would be costly in more ways than one. And the Grizzlies have enough talent where that shouldn't be the priority. But their depth is a concern. And the best way to replenish that would be in a trade. Because free agency, while Memphis will have the full mid-level exception to operate with, has never been the bag truly of this general manager, Zach Kleiman, and this Grizzlies front office. Obviously, it hasn't really been the bag of Memphis in general. So there's some don'ts. Don't get the team younger, please. And don't ever do a deal that would put the team in a worse spot in terms of the talent that is surrounding the pieces that you're bringing back into the fold. Do you agree with that? Do you have some hypothetical trades that we can ponder on the show sometime as the offseason grinds on? Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know in the comments. When we come back, we're going to close out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies talking about some NBA draft combine likes, some guys that I was impressed with over the week in Chicago. I wasn't there in Chicago, but following along, the Grizzlies will be in the second round if they make a pick, when they make a pick, barring some unforeseen deal. Some names that I like coming out of the combine. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by SKIMS. When I found out that SKIMS was making underwear for men, I got to tell you, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family. I had to give it a try, and let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear. I'm a bigger guy. Fit, comfort, finding the right style. It's been a challenge throughout my days on this mortal coil we call Earth. SKIMS changed all that. Their men's line oftentimes offers something for everybody, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I am a big fan of the boxer brief, personally. I am hooked. They are perfect for my active lifestyle. I like to work out. They move with me. They never lose shape, and they stay in place all day. Whether I'm getting exercise or I'm out running errands, spending time with the family, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I have ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing. It's almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Shop SKIMS Mens at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and SKIMS stores. Let them know that we sent you here at Locked On Grizzlies. And after you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show, Locked On Grizzlies, in the drop-down menu that follows. SKIMS is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA Basketball. Closing out this Tuesday edition of the podcast, talking about names and pieces that I like late in the second round coming out of the NBA draft combine. The number one name that I like, a lot of people like, and they like it so much that it's unlikely he's going to be there in the second round. More and more mock drafts in the last 24 hours have this young man going in the first round. But I was really impressed with Cedric Coward, a Washington State product, similar to our boy Jalen Wells. And he had a small sample size in his time at Washington State, much like Jalen Wells before him. But like Jalen Wells before him, this is a guy who's really seen his stock rise. A staggeringly impressive. He had 6'6.5" body frame, 7'2" and a quarter wingspan. So you were talking about one of the longer wingspans at the entire NBA combine. He was really impressive as a shooter, as a scorer. Did a lot of things off the dribble, both at Washington State and in the combine mix. Projects to be a really good three-point shooter. One of those players that the draft age is a concern, but for the Grizzlies, as I've talked about here, there, and everywhere, and will continue to do so, draft age should not be a concern. They need as many ready-to-go prospects as they can possibly have. My go-to tankathon has him there available for Memphis at the 48th pick. Michael and I have both talked about Memphis likely moving up from that selection. They have 2 picks in the second round. Don't be surprised if they only use one of them, combining those 2 to try to move up. And as wonderful as it would be to have Coward there at 42-ish overall, looking more and more unlikely, right? That guy's a riser, might take you getting into the late first round to acquire his services. And Memphis probably doesn't have the firepower to do something along those lines. I liked Coward a lot, though. I also like John Tonje. I've talked about him before. Really strong three-point shooter, really strong creator off the dribble, at least in terms of his own opportunities, right? He can be a wonderful catch and shoot shooter, but he's also shown other levels of his game offensively. He's old, no denying that. He's 24 years old as of right now, so he'd be older than some of the young Grizzlies on the roster as a rookie, but he provides floor spacing. He knows how to get to the free throw line. He is a solid shooter. I like John Tonje. He was a success for Wisconsin. I think he's going to work out in the NBA, at least as an end of rotation end of bench for cheap type of player, a guy that could maybe fill a two-way contract void. Another name that has been connected to Memphis in the second round, a guy who did some good things both at Duke and at the Combine, and we know that Zach Kleiman, being a Dookie himself, loves those Duke basketball players. Zion James, a really impressive senior year there at Duke, transferred in. I like him because he is a wing player, 6'6". His wingspan isn't the best, roughly the same as his height, but what he does do well is create for himself and for others. His assist percentages were really impressive among wings in college basketball. He was a positive defender, did a lot of good things off and on the court for the Duke Blue Devils. Zach Kleiman has talked about wanting dogs, right? Wanting guys that are going to compete, going to get after it. Zion James gave off that vibe for Duke, and I would really be impressed with him and excited about him as a second-round pick. Somebody to keep an eye on. One more name that I wanted to bring up before we wrapped up here today. Maxime Renaud. I continue to like him out of Stanford. Gives off some French center vibes. I'm not gonna pretend that he doesn't. And given his size at 7'1.5", you would have liked to have seen him be a better defender at Stanford. Those are fair things to point out, fair concerns. However, this guy can shoot the three-point shot. And if you're going to have a big like Zach Edey be your number one center off the bench, not quite Jay Huff, because Huff has some rim protection strengths that Renaud does not necessarily bring to the table. But I do see a lot of similar things in terms of shooting the basketball. And I really, really, really like how he's able to do that from that frame at 7'1.5". So I'm a fan of his. I also, kind of an honorable mention name, just to throw in one more. I was impressed with what Eric Dixon did out at Villanova. Another three-point shooter, a guy that can create multiple spacing opportunities given his three-point shot. I wish he rebounded better considering he was 6'9", and he's not somebody that really checks the box as a defender. There's a reason why he's being late second round projected, but they could do worse if they wanted to maybe trade back in the second round and pick up future draft picks. He would not be a bad guy. The Villanova prospect, Eric Dixon. And again, 24 years old, but Memphis could use another experienced big to be able to throw out there on the court, at least in my opinion, my humble opinion. So those are some of the names that I like coming out of the draft combine last week. Again, second round draft picks we're talking about here. Memphis unlikely to trade up in the first round. Anything's possible. I do think the least likely scenario, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, out of Creighton is another guy we've talked about here on the podcast before, but he keeps moving up the draft boards. I'd be surprised if he's there for the Grizzlies. But again, if he's on the board at 35, 36, maybe Memphis tries to trade up for him. The Grizzlies are not going to have two picks in the second round. I don't think so. I think they're going to make some sort of trade to move up. How big that trade is, we'll have to wait and see. And obviously, it could be a part of a larger deal for another veteran player coming back to Memphis. So those are some of the names that I really liked coming out of the draft combine. Coward was probably my favorite. Zion James, my second favorite. How are you feeling about the draft? Do you really care? Because it's going to be second round heavy for the Grizzlies. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. Hopefully you feel safer and wiser as you embark on your NBA trade machine journey. Maybe you want to trade up in the second round and bring in a diamond in the rough. Maybe you have some other names that you like. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X. Now that you've made us your first listen today, make your second listen Locked On NBA Big Board Show. Again, Rafael Barlow, a phenomenal NBA draft expert, reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board. See if he talks about some of the names that we talked about here on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google, wherever you get podcasts, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Be a part of the conversation and be a part of our little corner of the internet that we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you to everybody that is already an everydayer hanging out with myself and DeMichael each and every time that an episode drops. It is much appreciated. We will continue to grind as the offseason gets fully underway. Obviously, conference finals are getting kicked back up. We'll talk about those throughout the week ahead. We'll talk about other Grizzlies news, other nuggets to cover all around the NBA and making Memphis connections to them. That's going to be our focus over the next several days and weeks before the playoffs end and the real NBA off season begins. Thank you again one final time for being with me on this edition of the show. We will catch you tomorrow. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube. Make sure you are interacting and being part of the Locked On Grizzlies experience. Until next time, see you.